Hi everyone! Welcome to or welcome back to my little bookish channel. I am Allie. Thanks so much for being here. Subscribe, comment, give me a like. I really appreciate it. So, I'm really excited to do this. I put out my worst books of 2023 last week, and so obviously, today is all about the best books that I read in 2023. I read around about 120 books in 2023, and these are the 10 that I recommend. Like, these are the best books. These are the creme de la creme, okay? If you're going to read any of the books that I read last year, you have to read these ones, okay? It is mandatory. Anyway, it was really hard, actually, to filter down my favorite books of 2023 to 10. I'll show you right now. I had 26 5-star books in 2023, and that's fantastic, but I think it's also less than any of the years prior. I was really picky and selective with my 5-star books this year. So these are my 5 stars. I feel like that's a bit of a spoiler because I've highlighted the ones that I'm going to talk about today. So, should we just get on with it? Anyway, yeah, let's just do it. And also, I would love to know your favorite books of 2023. Please tell me, because I would like to read them if I haven't already. Anyway, let's just start first with my only non-fiction book. It's my one and only non-fiction book. Now, if you've been on this channel for any length of time, you would know. Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Let me just shove over a little bit. Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And I say that with all of everything inside of me. Like, this book transformed the way that I perceive myself and the way that I understand my relationship with the natural world. I read this very slowly. I read this on commute into the city for work. I read this here and there at home, but I mostly read it when I was out, and I did that deliberately. I felt like this was a book that needed to be out and about, you know. I was reading this in cafes. I was reading this on random, like, trams and trains. Like, it was a book that I wanted to read whilst being outside in the world in a variety of ways, right? And I think that just added to my experience of reading this. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a scientist. She is a biologist, and she's also an Indigenous woman. She is also a poet by heart. Like, she was either going to be a biologist or a poet. When she went to uni, that was her two, like, pathways that she was considering, and you can definitely tell the way that she writes. Beautiful. This is beautiful, okay? She weaves almost perfectly non-fiction. You know, you're talking about plants, you're talking about different trees and, you know, ecosystems and the life cycles of all these different things that happen in our world that I never really considered, right? But she also weaves in, you know, lore and, like, kind of myth and stories that she has been told, and it's been passed down to her from her family, but also from various other Indigenous people. But also a memoir. She talks of really, like, she's very vulnerable and she's very raw about being a mum, being an Indigenous woman, being a single mum, like, taking care of her 2 kids and just trying to be the best woman and best mum that she can be. And she's so vulnerable and honest, and it's perfect. It's a perfect combination of all 3 things. And I understand why people talk so highly of this, but also they always like put this on like cozy recommendations lists, and I know why, because it feels like you're being hugged just constantly. I cried so many times reading this book, again, because of how it transformed my way of thinking of just the world, just of nature and my relationship to it. I'm trying to force everyone who I know to read this. I think it's just one of those books that you need to read in your lifetime. It is absolutely stunning. It is absolutely stunning. So this is like top. Like, you need to read this. It's just absolutely wonderful. I feel like I want to read out the first sentence because it's beautiful. My annotation for the first sentence is, I feel like I'm being hugged. So this is the preface. Hold out your hands and let me lay upon them a sheaf of freshly picked sweetgrass, loose and flowing like newly washed hair. And it feels like a conversation that Robin Wall Kimmerer is having with you. It's just stunning, and I highly recommend it. Definitely the best non-fiction book I've read this year, and one of the best books overall that I read in 2023. Now, the rest of these books, they're not going to go in like a ranking order, because I don't know if I could do that. I don't think I'm there yet. But I'm going to go chronologically. I think I've got my reading journal here with some of my notes for each of these books. So we're just going to go like from there, okay? So, shall we begin the fiction segment of my best books of 2023? I don't know if you can tell, but it is so muggy here in Melbourne. Like, it's supposed to be summer. Bitch, where the fuck is she? Where is she? Because I can't see her. I can't see her. We've had such a muggy, wet summer. Well, to the start of summer. Actually, no, we've had a very wet summer. Okay. Let's talk about the first book that I consider the best book of 2023. Electra. You know it was going to be on this list. Electra by Jennifer Saint. This book. So I loved Ariadne. I gave that 5 stars. I think that might have been my favourite book of 2022, maybe. One of my favourite books of 2022. But Electra was electrifying. Did you see what I did there? So we follow 3 women in this book. We follow Electra. Oh my God. We follow Cassandra or Cassandra. I just like to say Cassandra. I don't know. I like the way that it flows off the tongue. So we follow Electra, Cassandra, and Clytemnestra. Now, Cassandra and Clytemnestra are not related, but they kind of also are through Agamemnon. Agamemnon takes Cassandra as his mistress, as his spoils of war, kind of like a war trophy. And Clytemnestra is like, the fuck? But also she understands the horrible position that Cassandra is in. Electra is Clytemnestra's daughter as well as Agamemnon's daughter. Now, this was amazing. Electra, her portrayal of it in this, fascinating, because she's so incredibly unlikable. She at no point tries to understand her mother, tries to empathize with her mother. She is very much brainwashed, I think, by Agamemnon. She is so caught up in this, like the legend of Agamemnon, right? His reputation, the fact that in her eyes he can do no wrong, that what her own mother is going through, she never really considers. So for me, this entire novel, Electra, is an incredibly unlikable character. She's, I feel like, in a way, the villain to her own story. I wrote in my notes that she kind of idolizes Agamemnon to an almost perverted degree, because sometimes it does go, like, fall into that slightly sexual-ish idolization. And what I mean by Electra possibly being the villain to her own story is because she becomes and is complicit to the system that ensures the continual oppression and violence against women. And I don't necessarily think that she understands that because she's very young, but also even when she grows up, there is such an immaturity to her. And I think that is because there is such a huge lack of empathy. She is a woman who does not understand women, the plight of other women, even though an entire aspect of her story is that she lives like a peasant woman, essentially. And it's just so hard to read from her perspective, knowing Clytemnestra's perspective and reading from her perspective. Because Clytemnestra, as we all know, I love Clytemnestra. I think her, like, the figure of Clytemnestra is absolutely so fascinating. And I recently, I also read Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati in 2023, which I thought was magnificent. It just didn't make my top 10. But Clytemnestra is a woman in an abusive relationship, finds herself for 10 years without her husband by her side, so she takes control. She rules, she becomes the ruler, and she fucking does amazing. She's also a warrior, she's Spartan, and so she was a warrior princess, and she has her kids because of course she has to, but she loves them with everything inside of her. But then one child gets sacrificed by her own father for good wind or whatever, and one child absolutely hates her because she's so indoctrinated by her own father that she can't understand the actions of her own mother. It's really fascinating. Cassandra's character, I just loved because I felt so sorry for her. If you've read the Iliad, I'm slowly working my way through the Iliad, this theme of women being property, of women being pawns in men's games, of women having to bear the brunt of men's punishment. That theme that you find in the Iliad, that theme that was also present in Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, is very much present as well in Electra, not only through Clytemnestra's perspective, but wholeheartedly, definitely through Cassandra's. And it's really sad, and it makes you really angry. I would consider Electra to be slightly darker than Ariadne, and also, having read Atalanta by Jennifer Saint, also is darker than Atalanta. I honestly think Electra is possibly Jennifer Saint's best book that is out currently. Although Ariadne was incredible, I think Electra it punches you in the gut. And that's why it's one of the best books of 2023. I don't own this actually physically, but Slewfoot by Brom. I read this earlier in 2023 for a horror-themed reading vlog. Bloody hell. I loved this. This was so good. It's about a woman in a colonial type of town, this early settling of the US, Puritan town, heavily religious. Her husband dies in a freaky way. Let's just say there's something in the woods. And the main character, Abatha, was fantastic. So she takes control of the farm, but then there's a local man who I think is the brother of her husband, or her just past husband, who wants the farm, and he's an absolute asshole. And so things happen. She meets this entity called Samson, who is Slewfoot. I loved them so much. I read Slewfoot as a romance. It's not, I don't think it's meant to be romance, but holy moly, did I love it. It was just so fascinating. Abatha was, God, she was such an incredible character. You start getting those kind of witch hunt vibes that were happening at the time, Speak intellectually, Alexandra. You are a doctor. You know, the witch hunts that were happening at the time, well, let's just say that Abatha, she gets arrested for it because Samson's been helping her. I loved it. I loved the incorporation of like indigenous folklore. I loved the way that Abatha just becomes a bad bitch, you know? I just really loved it. And I would love to own a copy and reread it and make everyone else read it, because it was such a unique story, and I just think more people need to read it. I feel like I'm way behind the slewfoot hype though. I feel like everyone was hyping up this book a few years back. But, you know, I just think that at its core, this story is about, you know, empowering yourself, right? Abatha is forced to make herself small. I mean, her father literally sold her to her husband, to this Puritan colony. So she's had to force herself to keep herself small, right? Her mother was kind of a witch, and she grew up with that. And so she's well versed in the witchiness. In this colony, she is less than, she is inferior because she is a woman. But then Slewfoot like comes into her life and everything changes, right? It's a revenge story. It's a romance. I say it's a romance. I just think it's a really fantastic book. Again, one of the best. There you go. And the next book I think is going to be very controversial. I know. Just call me disgusting. I can handle it, it's okay. Lapvona by Ottessa Moshfegh. First of all, what the fuck? Second of all, Ottessa Moshfegh has me in a chokehold. There's really nothing else to say. She has me in a chokehold. What did I specifically like about Lapvona? Let's just say none of these characters are good in like the morality sense, right? They're all absolutely horrendous. I mean, it's essentially a story about horrible characters interacting with even more horrible characters, right? That's what it is. It's just deplorable and disgusting. These characters, at no point do you feel sorry for them, do you empathize with them, do you resonate. This is it feels biblical, right? It feels very much like a biblical story that's meant to have an overarching meaning that you're supposed to learn from. And I think that's the best way of saying it. It feels very biblical. Okay? But I loved the exploration through these horrible, deplorable characters. I loved the exploration and the commentary on violence and on religion. You know me by now. You know that those two things, especially within kind of the framework of religion, especially of kind of the Catholic Church, it gets me going. Okay? It really does. Especially when it's done like this, like through control, and how that control is exerted supposedly through love. That could be love of a human, love, you know, religious figures of the church. It's fascinating. It truly fucking is for me. And for me, one of the main characters, Marek, his mother was the character I was most fascinated by, because for me, she embodied the sheep or the lamb. And there was huge kind of religious connotations. I think I speak more about this book somewhere else. I'm pretty sure it might have been my mid-freakout tag. So I'll link that somewhere, because I speak more about this there when it was slightly more fresh. But for me, Marek's mother was the character that I was most fascinated by, because she became the sacrificial lamb, essentially. the embodiment of this town's sins. And it's, again, felt very biblical. It is such a brilliantly written book, but a book that I would absolutely never recommend. So only in this instance will I say, don't read that book. Don't. Just don't. Because I can't in good faith recommend it, because it is so disgusting. It is so disgusting. But I recommend Ottessa moshfegh. She is an incredible author. She is just doing things that no one else is doing right now in the literary field, I think. Anyway, let's just finish talking about the depravity of lapvona and talk about the incredibility, is that even a word, of the next book, which is Babel by R.F. Kuang. We all know this book was going to be on my list. Come on. It's Babel. I read this, I think, over the course of a couple weeks, was it? Yes, over the course of a couple weeks. This book is well worth all of the hype that you see online, because it is incredible. There's no ifs or buts. No ifs or buts. It was absolutely incredible. I even wrote down in my notes, a masterpiece. I actually called this book a masterpiece. And I think why I consider this book so brilliant is the way it's written. R.F. Kuang, first of all, is one of the best writers of our generation. Can I say that? I think I'm saying that anyway. She's one of the best writers of our generation. She is. Fight me. I don't think there's anyone else like her right now. She wrote the Poppy War trilogy, which was absolutely incredible. She wrote Babel, which was absolutely incredible. She just released Yellowface. She released that in 2023, which I haven't yet read, but everyone is considering it to be also absolutely incredible. She is someone who cannot be contained by just one genre, and I think that is a testament to how incredible she is as a writer. I apologize that the light keeps on going in and out. It's a late afternoon. But what was truly brilliant about this book was the exploration of colonialism and the legacy of violence and, I guess, also trauma through translation, through the act of translation, as well as through the magic system. Although this book is technically a fantasy, the fantasy is very light. It is much more this alternate historical fiction, which I love. I loved it. The footnotes, brilliant. I love fiction books with footnotes. I think it's just so good. It's just so good. I think Kuang wrote with such deliberateness and such care to ensure that this story was told with force, so that readers couldn't look away. You couldn't ignore it, right? Some people might think that's heavy-handed. I think it's necessary. I mean, if you were around Instagram at the time this book was released, a very viral post went out reviewing this book and talking about how it was reverse racism, which doesn't exist. Yeah. And talking about how the white character was not treated well, and linked in with this idea that she had that it was reverse racism against white people. Completely missing the entire fucking point of the entire fucking book. So again, some people, like that person that reviewed it, might consider this to be heavy-handed. But like the person that did that review, it was necessary because people like her missed the entire point. It literally smacked her in the forehead, and she still didn't see it. White privilege at its finest. I do want to say though that this book is not without its flaws. The only critique that I had with this, and it's still one of my favorite books of the year, but I just want to be aware of some of the criticism that I have seen, and something that I also understood. The lack of a perspective from women. You had incredible characters in this, and incredible women who were incredibly intelligent, were also kind of women of colour that would have, I think, added something to this story, added something very strong, very powerful. But we don't really get a perspective from a woman until the end. And I think slightly it did a disservice to the story. I would have liked to know why Kuang decided to write purely from the perspective of a young man. I think it would have added a layer to the story, a layer of complexity, added more nuance. But again, in saying that, right, it's already quite big. So I can understand maybe that the scope was getting too big. Maybe she just thought I would just do it from Robin's perspective. This was absolutely fantastic. It is quite dense, and it does take a while to read through, and you do need a brain. But oh my god, it is magnificent. It is utterly magnificent, and I cannot wait to see what else R.F. Kuang puts out, because she's just, God, she's an incredible literary power right now. So I would definitely recommend Babel or Poppy War Trilogy. That was so freaking good. Such a good, it's a, is it a anti-hero or a villain origin story? Anti-hero origin story, morally grey. Read it, it's so good. Anyway, next one is absolutely no surprise to absolutely no one. Bunny by Mona Awad. I love this book, and I've spoken about this book so many times, so I'm not going to really speak much about it here. I love Bunny. I love everything about this book. I read it twice in 2023, and each time I just got more out of it. This is a book that I just understand the hype. I understand why people hate it, and I understand why people love it. I love it, and I'm so happy that I love it. It is so weird and surreal and out of this world, strange, and that's what makes me absolutely love it. The bunnies are terrifying, but also realistic. It's an insane novel, and I love it absolutely. Love it absolutely. No hesitation. You could maybe say that this book is my favorite book of 2023, number one spot, if I had to say it. I would say Bunny is number one, because this has stayed with me far longer, I think, than the others. I just think that the way this was written was wild, and everyone is so horrible. Similar to Ottessa Moshfegh's lapvona. They're all horrible, and the main character, Samantha, is not really a truly likable character, but it is so intriguing, it's so engaging, it's so immersive, it's so different. I mean, it's magical, right? There's bunnies that turn into fake people, fake men, and then you wonder if this entire thing actually happened, and Samantha is an unreliable narrator, and is she ill, or is it her thesis that she wrote and it's just a made-up story from her own mind, or did it actually happen, and is it actually magical or otherworldly? What is happening? And I love that. I love when books confuse you in a way that makes it enjoyable. When a book confuses you, that is it's not frustrating. That's when you know it's a good fucking book, right? When you feel super intrigued, super immersed, and super confused, it's a great combination. It's like Gideon the Ninth Gideon the Ninth, the locked tomb. That's the vibe. Confusion and immersion. Next book, The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. This is very different from the books that have been on this list prior to this, right? I read this for the Women's Prize long list or short list, my read through, and it's my first Maggie O'Farrell. I DNF'd Hamnet a few years ago. I just wasn't in the mood for it. It was very like emotional and dark. So this was my first official like Maggie O'Farrell novel, and I was very intimidated, very scared, because everyone loves Maggie O'Farrell, right? And I wanted to be one of those people. I love finding new authors to love, right? It's like the best part of reading. My mum is walking up and down in the backyard. Anyway, this was stunning. The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell was so stunning. And I was so happy that I bit the bullet and purchased a copy for myself. Lucrezia de Medici, so good. A lot of people think, I've seen on the internets, that people thought she was very boring to read from, as like her perspective, because you are with Lucrezia when she's a child until when she's 16, when she's like actually married to Alfonso, the Duke, right? I loved Lucrezia so much. I loved her voice. I loved how she developed. Maggie O'Farrell took such care in developing her character. I think that I loved her personality a lot. I loved her personality. I loved the way that she perceived the world. I loved her love of art. She was like, so much happens to her, but I feel like she was just such this innocent character, so wholesome, so just pure, so true, right? You just wanted to protect her. And all she wanted to do was her art. Like, that's all she wanted to do. This book is so heartbreaking, but also so heartwarming at the same bloody time. And it's a confusion of emotions. Again, confusion is such a big theme right now. She was forced into a marriage with an incredibly abusive man, a man that was supposed to marry her sister, but her sister dies, and then taken away from her home and her family and all that she's ever known. And again, she's still a child, she's a teenager, and into a place where she's made to feel unwelcome, right? With a man who claims to love her but switches so suddenly. He's an actual psychopath and is trying to kill her. She deals with so much. When I was 16, I was trying to figure out what the fuck I wanted to do in VCE. Like what subjects I wanted to study in year 11 and 12. And that's really it, right? And homework. What a shitload of homework we had. Like that's all I was worried about. I wasn't worried about being killed by your husband. Like, Lucrezia is just so fantastic. I loved her so much. I think this is a fantastic historical fiction novel, kind of on a similar like level for my love of Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I just think this worked really well for me. It worked really well for me. And maybe if you want to get into historical fiction, if you enjoy similar like literary books to me, literary books that are much more slower paced, character focused, no plot or vibes, and you want to get into historical fiction, try out The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. I think it would be a good place to start, because sometimes historical fiction can be hard to get into because you just like, you don't know where to go. And I used to only think like back in the day, you know, when I was still in high school, just entering university, I thought the only historical fiction that I enjoyed was romance historical fiction. But I think I've realized that I prefer like literary type historical fiction stories where it's more of a character focus than anything else. I think I'm growing. Look at me. I'm maturing. How fantastic. The next book that I consider the best of 2023 is A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. Of course, I was going to put this on the list. This was fan-fucking-tastic. This is the prequel to the Priory of the Orange Tree, but I still think you need to read Priory of the Orange Tree before you read A Day of Fallen Night. Like, listen, okay, we'll talk about this before I get into why I love this book so much. I think that A Day of Fallen Night assumes reader knowledge. There's not to the same level of explanation in terms of the world that you get in the Priory of the Orange Tree. That doesn't necessarily exist in A Day of Fallen Night. I think you need to read the Day of Fallen Night after you read Priory of the Orange Tree, because you need that foundation. You need to understand how the world works, how the kingdoms are running, how the priory kind of fits in to what's happening, and more about the religious colonization that happened to this particular kingdom, Innis. And then you read A Day of Fallen Night. I think my love for A Day of Fallen Night could only be the way it is because of the fact that I read Priory of the Orange Tree. A Day of Fallen Night doesn't do as well, I think, in explanation. You're kind of lost as the reader. Like, if I didn't read Priory, it would be hard to orientate myself to this world. It's huge, and there is a lot of world building in this, but I feel like, and correct me, you can also say your own opinions in the comments, but it feels like it assumes the reader already knows the basics of this world. So even though in the series it's a prequel, read it after the Priory, read this series in publication order. Read Priory first and then A Day of Fallen Night, or else you'll be like, why should I care about these people? Why should I care about the Priory? Like, what's important, and why is it important? Like, what happens at the end, and like everything that kind of happens that paves the way for what we know happened in the Priory. I feel like you would get more out of it if you've read Priory first. But anyway, this is an intense character-focused fantasy novel. It's huge. It is huge. And yes, things do happen, but it's mainly character-focused. And I think that's why I loved it so fucking much. Samantha Shannon is an incredible fantasy writer, and I've been tossing up whether or not to read the Bone Season series because I just want more of her fantasy writing. The way that she weaves different plot lines, how she makes characters come in contact with each other. It's so big brain. Like, it's just incredibly intelligent writing that I don't think she gets enough credit for. I don't think she does. And I feel like she needs to. There's also such fantastic casual queer rep in this book and in this series. It's amazing. Like, she made this world where essentially like homophobia doesn't exist in like certain sects of the kingdoms, right? In certain states or whatever. And I just think, yes, that's how fantasy should be written. Like, it's just, she's just so good. And it's so casual and so easy. That's how it should be. You know what I mean? Like, there's no thought that they just exist. And it makes me so fucking happy to see that type of representation, in the sense that like queerness is normative and not abnormal. Like, it's just fantastic. It just exists, right? Although this is so huge, I didn't even write down the dates that I read it. I feel like I went through this relatively quickly, like within a couple weeks, because it is fast paced, even though it's mainly character focused. But we get such interesting background pertaining to the actual priory itself and how things are maneuvered to result in essentially what happens in the Priory of the Orange Tree. It's just fantastic, and I really love it, and I loved being introduced to all these different characters, and I can't wait to see what else Samantha Shannon writes in this series. I really hope she writes a sequel to the Priory of the Orange Tree that's set like 10 years in the future of the Priory, just so we can get our happy ending. I just want a happy ending, okay? That's all I want. That's all I want in my life, and I really hope that we get it from Samantha Shannon. The next book, no one's surprised, it's The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time book. I feel like every year a Wheel of Time book is on my best of list, because it's the best, like some of the best fantasy that I read in my year. Unfortunately, I only read this book from the Wheel of Time series this year in 2023, and that's because time. I kept on just saying, oh, next month I'll read it. But I loved The Shadow Rising so much, and it's really hard for me to say whether or not this is my favorite or number 3 or number 2. Oh, I don't know. It's really difficult to say which one's my favorite right now, but this was amazing. I think for me, why this was so fantastic is a lot of the character work that we get. This is very character focused, this one. Not a lot happens, but also a lot happens. But again, not a lot, but a lot. I love the Aiel people. I think they're so freaking cool, and I love reading about them. And we got more of them in this book, and more of their world, like understanding their politics and how they do certain things. But my favorite plot line was Perrin's. Perrin is my favorite character in the Wheel of Time at the moment. I love absolutely everything about him. I just loved what happened in this book pertaining to his character, and I cannot wait to see what happens. I'm also very intrigued by Matt's plotline. I feel like he's going to really surprise us, because he kind of surprised me slightly in The Shadow Rising, as well as in the previous book. I think we're going to get a really interesting character from him. If you've read this series, please don't tell me. No spoilers, please. I love this series. I love it so much. It is already a series of books that has become, quite honestly, like very close to my heart. And I don't know if I'll be able to finish the entire series in 2024, but I'll definitely try. I am just so excited to see what happens, but also terrified, because people are going to die. They are, aren't they? They have to, right? I don't know. But this was, again, a prime example of fantasy writing. Robert Jordan writes atmosphere so well. He is such an immersive writer. I just love everything, absolutely everything about this series. Oh my god, the detail, insane. Absolute insanity. I loved it. I loved it. And then let's talk about the last book that I consider the best of 2023. Now this is a bit controversial, and it's on this list purely because I had so much fun reading it. We're not going to talk about the quality of it, but in terms of reading experience, oh my god. Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. I've already talked about this book and my thoughts and opinions specifically about this book in my November reading wrap-up, so I'll link that down below and up above. I fully acknowledge that this is not incredibly written. It's not even well written. It's written, okay? There are words on the page. And that should be enough. For me, it's enough, okay? I read this purely for the drama, purely for Xaden, purely for my teenage self, because reading these books makes me feel like I'm in high school again. I don't know what it is that these books even though they provoke such intense frustration and annoyance when I read them, because Violet is a dumb bitch, I love them. I love them. And I think it's the way they're written. I think Rebecca Yarros leans into the fact that they're not good, that there are loopholes and like plot holes, I should say, that the world building is very mediocre, that Violet as a main character is slightly dull and is not really interesting. But I think she leans into it. And she knows what she's doing. And it's so fast paced. And similar, you know, in my worst books of 2023, I talked about Verity by Colleen Hoover, and how it's so fast paced that by the end you're like, did I actually enjoy that, or was that trash? This is another version of that phenomenon, right? Fourth Wing, Iron Flame. It's copy and paste of that same type of way of writing. But the difference is that the cast of characters, I think, are easy to fall in love with. I don't like Violet as a main character. I think I've spoken about how she's very frustrating. She's boring. She is unintelligent. She's absolutely ridiculous. And she creates her own problems. She's very frustrating to read. But you kind of hate to read it, but you kind of love to read it, right? But the cast of characters, her friends surrounding her, are really adorable. And their loyalty to her doesn't make sense because it's Violet, but also they're just so precious that you keep on reading. And Xaden, Rebecca Yarros knew what she was doing. It's basically resend from ACOTAR, copy and paste, right? It's the archetype. And it works because we all love that shit, right? We all love it. And I'm a basic bitch. I love shadow powers and shadow main characters, main love interests, whatever. I'm a sucker for that sort of stuff. So Iron Flame for me is one of my best books of 2023 because reading it was one of the best experiences that I've had in a really long time. And I think it's also because I buddy read it with Hannah when we were in Phillip Island, and we continued buddy reading it when we came back home, like live texting our reactions. It was just so much fun. And again, it reminded me of being a teenager, of being obsessed with those types of books. I mean, I just love it. I really do, and I'll continue reading them, and I'll most likely continue hate loving them. Like, I just think that the way that Rebecca Yarros writes, how fast-paced everything is, the twists and the turns and the random character events that really don't make sense, and the random deaths that aren't really necessary, but she makes them happen. Just the random things that occur that you're like, why the fuck did that just happen? Doesn't make sense. I'm really confused. It provokes such emotion that I just ended up loving it. I loved it. I threw this book across the floor. Well, not actually, because we were in Phillip Island and I didn't want to like damage anything, but like in my head I did. I kept on screaming about how stupid Violet is, about how ridiculous some of the world building is, the lack of world building. Like, I was just very frustrated, very angry, very annoyed, and I fucking ate it up. Absolutely ate it up. I don't know what else to say. Like, there's really no way to justify this, but it is what it is. This reading experience was incredible. It was amazing. It was so fun, and I cannot wait for the third book in this series, just so I can throw it across the room. I love it. I love it. And I think I'm going to try and see if I can find other books that provoke that sort of reaction, right? Where I'm just like, oh, like, I fucking hate that book, I love it so much, kind of thing. I love that for me. I don't know. I just had a lot of fun. Fourth Wing didn't make the cut because I gave that 4.5 stars, but I was just so obsessed with Iron Flame that I had to give it 5 stars. I feel like both of them are 5 stars because they're both essentially the same, which I've said before in terms of writing quality, but Iron Flame was a blast to read. It was a blast, absolute blast. And that, my friends, is the end of this very long video. My favourite books of 2023. Read them, well, not all of them. Stay away from Lapvona and maybe stay away from yarros, but everything else, I highly recommend. Thank you so much for staying with me for this entire video. I cannot believe we're at the end of the 2023 reading year. I can't believe we're in 2024. It's absolutely ridiculous. I can't believe it's taken me so long to recover from COVID. Like, what the actual fuck? I woke up this morning congested again. At least my voice sounds like kind of normal. Oh my god. And 2023 is over. My Lord in heaven. If you want a video where I talk about my books that were 4.5 stars, so they weren't the best books, but they were still some of my favorites, let me know, because I can do that. I had a lot of 4.5 stars actually in 2023 because I was so picky with my 5 stars. So I'll be really interested to see what I gave 4.5 stars, and if upon reflection any of those are rated down or rated up. That could be an interesting video. Let me know. I'm at your beck and call. You tell me what to do. Anyway, the light is leaving me, so I'm gonna skedaddle out of here. But thank you so much for watching. As always, friends, take care and stay safe, please. Don't want anything happening to you. You're beautiful, and I love you. Happy reading. Bye, friends.